Wander Wealthy Podcast, episode 95 with Naz Barouti. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Wander Wealthy Podcast. For those who are new to the show, my name is Tess Wicks. I'm the host, also a money coach, content creator, and founder of Wander Wealthy. Welcome, welcome, welcome to this lovely podcast. Today we have such a fun episode in store. I feel like February has been kind of the month of love. Last week we talked with Bobby Rebell about financial red flags. This week we are being joined by my guest, Naz Barouti. Now, a quick little professional introduction of Naz, and then I'll tell you a little bit about what to expect from the show. Naz is a lawyer, author, entrepreneur, media commentator, and public speaker. She's known in the legal world as the estate planning guru. Back in 2011, she established Barouti Law Corporation, which now boasts 5 offices in Southern California that specialize in estate planning, retirement planning, wealth management, prenuptial agreements, and the like. So this episode, we're really diving into some of the legal protections. Naz says that she's not your average lawyer. In everything she does, she first and foremost considers herself a legal advocate for women. Her goal is to help all women understand why they need to protect their assets when entering into a partnership, whether for love or business. And her expert yet approachable demeanor makes it easy for clients and listeners alike to absorb the legal world of asset protection. This is just true through and through. As we get into the episode, you'll hear us talk about specifically prenuptial agreements, because I feel like a lot of the legal mumbo jumbo we just kind of shy away from and we don't want to think about. And we've also sort of positioned them as like, oh, well, prenups, those are bad. Those just mean you're expecting to get a divorce, which is entirely not true. If you want to have some protections for yourself, but even for your partner, they can be a really good thing. There's also estate planning, which we don't get into in this episode, but estate planning is another form of protection that we so often fail to do because A, we don't recognize the importance of them, because I think when we start talking about these legal things, it scares us. We're thinking this is going to be expensive. We think we don't really understand this. We don't know why it's important. And so we just don't do it. So my goal for this episode was really to dive in on one specific topic that is legal focused and that, in the theme of the month of love is going to be really important for us to talk about. And I want all my ladies and gentlemen who listen to the podcast to be informed and know what is up, especially if you are in a serious relationship, if you're engaged, even if you are married, it's not too late. You can do a postnup. We talk about all that in this episode, plus so much more. It was super fun to chat with Naz because she really breaks it down in a way that makes sense. She made a comparison with, I think, the New York Real Housewives. So she's my girl because she made a nice pop culture reference. And I always love a good, especially Bravo TV reference. So without further ado, I will stop babbling and we'll get into this interview with Naz Barouti. Naz, welcome to the Wander Wealthy Podcast. I'm super excited to have you on the show today. We have some great things to discuss. I've gone ahead and done your professional bio, but I would love it if you could just go ahead and introduce yourself and start off by telling us what your favorite thing about your life is right now.
Oh, wow. Great way to put me on the spot right away. So my name is Naz Barouti. I am an attorney, radio host in Southern California. I've been doing radio for about 8 years now. And also the same time I started my practice. My favorite thing about my life right now is ever since my book came out, I love getting emails, texts, Instagram messages from women who have read my book and have been inspired or been shocked that they didn't know the law and how it works. And it's just very satisfying knowing that I've produced something that is actually helping people. And I think that's my favorite thing about my life right now.
That is so awesome. Tell us a little bit about your book since you mentioned it, and then we'll talk more about it later on.
Sure. It's called Love, Death, and Money, A Woman's Guide to Legally Protecting Yourself. And I wanted it to be a very easy guide for women to protect themselves and know how to protect themselves, because it's so hard to kind of follow attorneys and their train of thought or the language that they use. And I hadn't seen any books or self-help books that were addressing the fact that this is just a very tough conversation to have, and a lot of women weren't having it. And it's kind of like a legal Bible for women and a different stage of your life. So you could be a woman that's just going to college, or you could just be living with someone or about to get married, or you're going through a divorce, or you're a single mom, and this book will apply to you, and it kind of guides you on how to protect yourself. Now, the book is geared for people that are living in California, because I'm an attorney in California, but I think that the stories resonate with anyone, and it can also apply to men too. You can take any character or story in that book and just switch it to a man, and it applies.
Yeah. And I think, even if the book is specific to people in California, I think that you can use it, even if you're not in California, as a guide to apply it to your life. The legal and financial realm, I mean, there's so much material out there from just even professional resources that are so positioned towards men, that even just having something as a woman to look at and go, okay, this is what someone would do, whether they were in California or not, but like, this is what people are doing. This is what she's saying. Now, how can I take that to my professional and ask them, what should I be doing here? Yeah,
absolutely. And you're right. These are conversations that we see a lot of times men having, and the motivation behind the book, I mean, it's these stories I've experienced these situations with my clients throughout the years in my practice, but also when the Me Too movement came around, I wanted to take that momentum that women had, and I wanted to shift the power back to women in a positive way of, okay, we've been through all of this. We've been alienated in the workplace, and we are coming out of that. But how do we come out of that in a legal way where we're aware of all these things to protect us? Because I think that a lot of times in relationships, people control with finances. So this is a great book for women to kind of just take control and independence and as far as their finances. And, we always talk about how it's important that women love themselves, and it's not about the exterior, and it's loving yourself from within. But I also think it's so important to teach women at a young age, girls, the importance of financial independence. And this was the driving force, I think, behind the book as well.
Yes, absolutely. It's like you can love yourself by meditating or taking a bath, but you should also love yourself by protecting your assets.
Exactly. And we just don't, it's because I think it's such a masculine conversation to have. I mean, if that makes sense, that it's kind of like we teach young men to be, like strong and powerful and don't cry and be the breadwinners. And it's not like that anymore. We have to teach young women to do the same. And, and I know I've gotten mixed reviews where a lot of people say, well, there's something to be said about having specific gender roles. But I grew up in such a way where that didn't exist in my household. It was just like, you're a child, you're my child, but I'm not going to, baby you because you're a daughter. I'm going to teach you how to be strong and independent so that no one can mess with you. And I think there's something to be said about that.
Yeah. And the gender role conversation is so confusing as it is, but I think like we should give everyone the tools and the resources that everyone is, should have provided to them, and then they can choose what type of role they want to play in their life.
Absolutely.
I would love for you to take us back to your childhood, because on the show we love to kind of share openly what our money story was growing up. And I'm super curious how you got into your role now as both on the radio and doing your practice. So tell us kind of the whole story from start to finish.
Sure. So I came to the United States when I was 2 years old. So my family is from Iran. So everyone just kind of picked up their lives and came to California, and it was an adjustment, and I had to adapt. And I never saw, like, my parents worked really hard, but I never felt that like void of not having a full life or not being provided everything that I wanted. I never saw that. What I always saw was that my parents worked really, really, really hard, and it was really important for them to be their own boss. My dad has instilled that in me at a very, very young age. And so I grew up in a middle-class family, and I never had weird issues with like money, or I never was afraid of like, are we going to have enough money for rent, or I want this toy, am I going to be able to get it? That was never the issue, because it was all about, if you work hard, you can have anything that you want. And so I worked really hard throughout my school years. I mean, I didn't take a break like in high school. Like my freshman year of high school, my dad was like, okay, so what's going to be your major in college? And I'm like, well, I'm in high school. And he's like, yeah, but we don't want to waste time in college. Like you need to know. So, you're not going to do the whole 5-year, 6-year run in college. You're going to finish in time. And so I was like, I always wanted to be a lawyer. Like when I was young, I never watched like cartoons. I watched Judge Judy instead. Like, I know that sounds so weird, but I would watch her. I remember eating my cereal in the mornings and watching Judge Judy. And I always wanted to be a lawyer, but at the same time, I always wanted to be an entertainer. I was really into like music and performing. And I knew that my parents, from a Middle Eastern background, they weren't going to be in favor of, me being an actress. So I went to law school. I didn't take any breaks. I finished college in 4 years, went straight to law school, finished in 2.5 years, and then moved back to California, studied for the bar, and I started my practice right away. And I knew that being in the office was going to make me, I don't know, it was going to bore me. Like, as much as I love what I'm doing, I needed something different throughout the day. And I love entertaining people and talking about what I do. And I realized that I was really good at it. And so that's where it led me into radio, being a legal commentator for TV, radio outlets. And I realized that my message, it resonates with people, and they understand it, and they understand the importance of taking control over your life and not just sitting back and letting the government decide for you. And I talk about that in my book, that if you don't have a plan, the government has one for you. And when you put it in those words, it's very shocking for people. And, I realized that as much as I love what I do in the office, it's also really important to be an advocate for women and just give them the tools and the information that they need to protect themselves. And that became my mission, to make sure that people had the resources, people had the knowledge, and price wasn't a deterring factor for people to get these documents, and that they didn't turn to online resources or like pre-printed forms from, Google searches to kind of protect their estates. And I just really love what I do, and I love talking about estate planning. It's also like a field where it's a lot of older clients that are in estate planning, and it's male dominated. And when I get clients that come into my office, they're kind of shocked about how young I look. And I always tell them, listen, in estate planning, you want an attorney that's going to outlive you, not die before you. So that kind of eases them into the conversation of working with like a younger attorney.
Yeah. Okay. I have so many questions, but first I have to say, I love what you do, because you are like the ideal definition. And I feel like I've done this too. We've heard so many people from older generations be like, oh, millennials, they're so entitled. They don't want to be stuck in an office. And it's like, yeah, we don't want to. And we've figured out how to get out of there.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
The fact that you're like using all of your different passions and figuring out ways to, take your mission and your message and spread it through also being in radio, but still doing, your attorney work and then writing your book. I mean, it's so cool with the generation that we've grown up in, and this world of online and just mobilization. It's so cool to see what kind of careers we can really make for ourselves. So I just wanted to say that.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think that social media gets a bad rap sometimes, but if you use it in the right way and you use it as a tool to market and promote yourself, and that's another thing, being comfortable with knowing what you bring to the table and promoting it. Because if you don't promote yourself, who's going to promote you? And that's also really important when it comes to social media and using that as a tool to expand your business and a marketing tool. It's not just about posting a picture of your lunch and, where you are at all times. It can be used to really develop a great inner circle and just connections that you never even thought of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you can use it also from an educational perspective, just surrounding yourself with the right people online, so to speak. You can get a lot of good information there. I also wanted to ask you, I don't know if you know, but I currently live in Italy, and it's so interesting to see kind of the difference that culture plays in people's relationship with money. And I'd love to know from you, coming from an Iranian family and also being an immigrant family, how do you see the way your family and money operates, and how that might differ from someone who was born in America, and you moved when you were 2, so you're basically the same. But how, even I think it plays through our culture, and our parents teach us these lessons that then we see other people using different strategies or tactics and having different stories. Did you notice a difference?
I do, only because if you look at the history of the country that I was born in and I came from, it's always on a survival. You're on a survival mode. That survival mode is always on because, if you look at the revolution and then the Iran-Iraq war, it's just people are always concerned about being financially secure because you can't really rely on the government to kind of take care of you. And if you kind of look with American culture, we have this mentality that there's going to be enough in Social Security for our retirement and the government has our back. But if you step back and you realize that there's not enough resources, the government's always not going to protect you. And if anything, everything that you worked so hard for throughout your life, if you don't have the proper legal documents, the government is going to take more than half of it. So I think from that point of view of always being in survival mode, money plays a huge role in your upbringing to make sure that you have enough of it and you save enough of it and you are independent and you make sure that you don't rely on just one person or the government to kind of take care of you. I've seen that difference when it comes to my clients and their cultural background, that when you aren't from necessarily the United States, there's this fear of making sure that you always are protected and you can provide for your family.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Let's go into the tangible tips round. I want to dive more into your expertise, and I would love to talk about money, relationships, and protection. First, why is it important for you to be a legal advocate for women when it comes to relationships and money?
Well, I've seen a trend, and I hate to even vocalize this, but it's just based on my 8 years of practice. And what I've seen is that women tend to take a backseat role when it comes to their financial futures. And we see this time and time again. I mean, if you just turn on any reality show, Real Housewives of New Jersey, Teresa Giudice, kind of let her husband take control over the finances and working with the accountants and filing the tax returns. And she just signed off on everything. And what ended up happening? Fraudulent loan documents, tax returns that weren't properly filed. And then she had to go to jail. And she can't use the excuse of, well, I trusted my husband and I relied on him to make these decisions and I just signed off on these documents. It doesn't work like that. You have to take accountability for what you sign, and you need to know what you're signing, and you need to ask questions. And sometimes I always advise women, it might be best to have your own independent counsel or your separate advisors to kind of help you, because I see this so many times where women depend on their significant others to take the lead when it comes to financial security. And I kind of want to shift that narrative of, taking a proactive role when it comes to your finances.
Yeah. And I think in addition to that, from my perspective of understanding the finance piece, you find a lot of women, in general, women outlive their husbands.
Yes.
And then if that happens, then the husband dies, and then you have maybe something in retirement, or maybe what you thought was being saved for retirement isn't. There's so many question marks that if you're not involved in the process early on, you can get in some hot water.
And I'm not for pushing this like agenda that all women should work, and like I don't support stay-at-home moms or our housewives. I actually think that's like one of the hardest jobs to have.
Oh,
My focus is that, like you said, women do outlive men, and we tend to be the caregivers for our parents. And by the time it comes around for us being in old age, there's no one really to take care of us, because like either our kids are off with their own families and their own children, our spouses have predeceased us, and then here we are not knowing how we're going to take care of ourselves and long-term care options or retirement options. And so because of that, because we're outliving men, we need to take an active role in planning and asking the proper questions and making sure that we have rainy day money. And it's a matter of also just not relying on someone else's income for our security, because we see it time and time again where either these spouses have affairs or they leave their spouses 20 years into a marriage. I've seen this so many times. And by the time that the divorce is finalized, if that woman is getting alimony or spousal support, it's not enough to take care of her needs day in and day out. And then it's also such a burn emotionally to know that you've invested so much time and energy in building a life with someone else, and it could just be destroyed within a matter of like weeks or months because that person just wants out.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about prenuptials.
Mm-hmm.
Can you dumb it down for us and just talk about like what are they and why would you want to get them if you were entering into a committed relationship or marriage?
Sure. So there are some states in the United States that are community property states, which means that the minute that you become married, anything you earn during your income or anything you buy, if you decide to get a divorce, it gets split 50-50. There's 9 states that are community property states, California being one of them. But the goal of a prenuptial agreement is that you are deciding before you get married with your significant other, if you were to divorce, how assets would be divided, being very clear about spousal support, about business interests, real estate interests, about income during the marriage. It's kind of like a guideline of, okay, if we are going to get a divorce, this is how everything is going to get divided. Now, there's a negative connotation that's associated with prenuptial agreements, but for me as an attorney and someone that's in this field, it actually preserves the romance, because I always tell my clients, do you think it's easier to talk about how to divide assets and talking about finances when you're in love with someone or when you hate them and you're about to get a divorce? So I would pick the first option of discussing those issues and kind of getting a feel of where that person's headspace is when it comes to these topics.
Well, and as trite as this might sound, it's kind of like entering into a business agreement. I mean, before you enter into a business agreement, you really want to define, okay, what percentage do you own? What percentage do I own? And it sounds really weird to treat your marriage like a business, but you almost want to do that before you tie the knot, because then what if you wins the lottery and then you have to decide how you're going to split the money? I mean, it can get murky.
Yeah, I mean, I always tell clients that are coming into my office for business planning, if they're getting into, I'm setting up a corporation or a limited liability company for them and their business partner, I always say, okay, instead of talking about how much each person's going to have or like the details about the business, let's start backward. Let's start about having the conversation of how you're going to divide this business if it doesn't work out. And they usually get surprised. And I'm like, well, it's easier to talk about this now rather than when you're 5 years into the business and the business is doing really well and then the business partners just don't get along anymore and they have different visions and they want to break off. You already had this conversation, and it was much easier to have now when everyone's on good terms. And I also think that women think that prenuptial agreements are documents that for them where they're signing off their rights, and it's not like that anymore. I'm seeing more women have larger estates and make more money than their significant others, and they're trying to protect themselves. And even if the male in the relationship or the other partner is making more money, it doesn't mean that you're signing off on it. It's a negotiating tool. Like, okay, if you're going to be the breadwinner in the relationship, but I'm going to stay home and take care of our family unit and I'm going to have kids, I'm going to be entitled to X, Y, and Z for this many number of years that we're married. So it's also a bargaining tool. It's not one-sided. And I think we see in movies and television and Hollywood that prenups are kind of a way for people to say you can't have this or you can't have that, but it also is a tool to say what you want and what you deserve.
Yeah, I think that they do get a negative connotation because then it's like, oh, we're planning for this to all fall apart. But I think you can also think of it like, no, it's just there, but don't let it fall apart, or maybe let it fall apart. I mean, it can ease the pain. You might be able to more easily get out of a relationship if you know you have a prenup and you had agreed upon it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I always say, do you want to just split the money that you guys worked together to earn between each other, or do you want two other lawyers to be a part of your estate and like get the money? You know, as much as I want to be an advocate for attorneys as well, I don't think it's necessarily fair to create this, you know, this battle between a husband and wife or two spouses over their assets, and then the lawyers are the ones that walk away filthy rich. There's no point in doing that when you guys can keep that money to yourselves.
So you said 9 states have this law. Yes. Where once you get married, anything you make during the marriage after that point, then it has to be split 50-50 if you don't do a prenup, right?
Correct. And the only things that are separate are any assets that you had before marriage or any gifts or inheritance. So if you receive an inheritance during your marriage, that will stay your separate property. But I always suggest that if you've established a business before marriage, to kind of write a prenuptial agreement, because if that business grows during the marriage, that percentage that it grew during the marriage your spouse will be entitled to it. So I see a lot of young couples who are in Silicon Valley and, you know, they have like an app and it's just a startup or a startup business and it's not making any money. And they say to me, well, we don't need to do a prenup. And I say, well, what if you're the next Jeff Bezos? Or what if you create something like Facebook?
He's in this situation too, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he's the richest man in the world. And, you know, Amazon, although him and his wife have been together for so long, and I'm sure she's contributed so much to his success, but now there's this issue of, okay, how are we going to divide this business interest? And I wouldn't be surprised if they actually signed a postnuptial agreement when they knew that they were going to separate. And, you know, just to get into a postnup now, some people won't write a prenuptial agreement. They get married and then they do a postnuptial agreement, which means that you're already married and now you're deciding on how things will get divided. And I prefer clients don't do that, just because it's harder to force someone to sign a postnuptial agreement once you're married. You know, there's no, you don't have the right to kind of force them to do it. So I always recommend that if you think you have a business that's not worth a lot now, still write a prenuptial agreement to protect it, because you don't know what's going to happen in the future.
So if a listener is about to get married or even engaged, what are some things that they should start thinking about and clarifying with their spouse before, or future spouse, before entering into their legally binding relationship?
Well, I always think it's a good idea to talk about how that person views divorce and how that person would separate assets if they're not together. And I know it's a very uncomfortable conversation to have when you're in a relationship or you're engaged or about to get married. But if you look, I mean, most marriages end up in divorce. Is it like 51%? That's a huge number. And it's not a matter of not wanting to stay in that relationship or not being loyal or not fully loving that person, but people change. And when people change, it becomes harder to talk about finances and money. And it's better to have these conversations of, you know, how would you feel if we were to get a divorce and we were living in a home together? Like, how would that get split up? If I decide to stay home and have kids and you're the only one working, how would you feel about spousal support? These are all important conversations to have. I mean, we have more conversations about what flower arrangements we're going to have, what DJ we're going to have at our wedding, what kind of food we're going to have. Yes, as important as those things are for the wedding, I think that your financial affairs affairs are even more important. And if you can't have these conversations now when you're not even married, I think it's a huge red flag about how secure you are in your relationship. Someone should not get offended if you have these questions. I mean, you're committing your whole life to them. So being able to talk about money and finances to me is not a huge issue. And if that person gets offended, it's a red flag for me. And I think that it's best to kind of reevaluate whether you really want to get into a long-term relationship with someone like this, because life doesn't get easier as we grow older and as marriages progress and the number of years you add on to your marriage, life gets difficult. And if you can't have these important conversations now, then it's not going to get any easier 10 years from now.
I totally agree. Thank you so much for sharing all of your thoughts around that. I want to go into the money round where we get a little more information about you and your personal relationship with money. I'd like to know what you would say your relationship with money is like today.
Well, it's really interesting, and what my relationship is, I don't want it to come across as everyone should have this kind of relationship, because everyone's in a different situation and they have different finances. But for me, I grew up in a way where when you want something, just buy it. And obviously you have to be smart about it. But I think life is too short to kind of say, okay, well, I need to save for this and I need to save for that. You have to enjoy your money, but at the same time, be smart about it. I always make sure that I put money aside for my retirement. I make sure that all my bills are paid before I do a big purchase. But I don't have this like weird relationship with money where it's constantly on my mind. There are people that nickel and dime everything. And like I said, it's based on your situation. But I think that I'm so fortunate to be in a position where I don't have anyone that's depending on my income besides me. So everything that I make, I can invest it in myself. So that's my relationship. And I don't mean it to come across as, it's different. I'm at an age where a lot of people either have families or someone's depending on their income or they're married or they have young kids, and I don't. So my child is my business. So I put everything into my business and things that I enjoy.
I love that. And I think you probably are in a position where you see a lot of people who maybe didn't enjoy everything and then they died or something with estate planning.
I've seen that a lot. It's like, I see a lot of young professionals that have just saved, and then a freak accident happens, and then they didn't enjoy their life, and there was just all this money in their bank accounts, or they decided that they were going to buy real estate and not like travel or see the world or not go to that nice new restaurant that just opened. And I don't have that kind of relationship with money. If I really want to go to a restaurant, I don't even look at the menu prices, because I'm like, how long am I going to be on this earth? If you can afford it, I think you should live life to the fullest and do whatever you want with it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there's always a balance there. What is your current money plan? Meaning, how do you make money? What do you spend your money on? And what are you saving for? I know you outlined it a little bit, but if you want to get a little more detailed.
Yeah, so I make my money through my practice. I have several offices in Southern California. So my radio shows, that's where I generate a lot of leads, where clients come, they contact our office, they do their estate planning. And then now I have the sale of my book. That's another source of income. But what my plan is, right now I'm in a time in my life where my career is very important to me. And a lot of what I'm making is being put back into the business, whether it's for marketing or it's just, anything that can help my business grow. That's my number one priority. And a lot of people think that, I'm at a position where I don't need to do more marketing, but the level that I want to get at, I always joke that I want to get like to Oprah level status or, Madonna digits with how much money that I make. But if you don't invest it back in your business, then you're not going to see the level of success that you want. I mean, if your business is the most important thing, I think you should put everything into your business. Now, again, I don't have anyone else that's relying on me. So I'm putting everything in my business, I'm paying my bills, and then I'm planning for retirement. Those are my top 3 expenses right now. But number 1 would be my business.
Very cool. Naz, thank you so much for getting personal with us. We have one last section to go through, which is the quick and dirty Q&A round. Just a couple fast-paced questions to wrap up the show. Number 1, What is your most used app on your phone that isn't social media?
I use my ClassPass app the most, and that's just to schedule my workouts. I started this workout journey the last year, and I lost 40 pounds with doing hot Pilates. So I'm always on ClassPass scheduling my weekly workouts.
Oh, that's so awesome. One thing that you just can't stop thinking about recently?
Besides food, my food is always on my mind. Just I want to get to a level in my career where my peers and people that may not personally know me respect me as a businesswoman, and that's constantly on my mind. The minute that I open my eyes to the minute I close my eyes, just being in a position where I can influence people in a positive way.
Very cool. Who is your favorite person to follow on social media?
I love Grant Cardone. He is an entrepreneur and motivational speaker, and there's not one day that goes by that I don't look at his videos because he's so inspiring and he's just in your face, honest, no filter, and I resonate really well with people like that.
What is one expense you'll never cut from your budget?
One expense I will never cut from my budget is probably any money that's associated with my health and food, because I think that if you don't take care of yourself, then you can't take care of other people and be successful in what you do. So anything having to do with my health and nutrition, I will not cut.
And your favorite money book or business book?
Anything, again, that Grant Cardone writes. He has this concept of 10xing your life, meaning that you have big goals, big dreams, and you go full force with anything that you do. And I've applied that concept in my life, and as I've applied that concept, I've realized that I've just grown exponentially. And I think everyone should have that mentality of that your goals are never silly enough. They're not silly, and you should always have really big dreams. And anyone that tells you otherwise, you should cut out of your life.
I love that. Naz, thank you so much for coming on the show. You have brought us a topic that can get complex and doesn't always seem sexy, and you've made it sexy and approachable, and I really appreciate that. Tell us where we can find you so we can keep up with you.
Sure. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter, and my handle is Naz Barouti, and then you can go to nazbarouti.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right. That's a wrap on episode number 95 with Naz Barouti. Do you guys feel smarter? I feel smarter. I feel like I actually understand a big, bold concept not for once. I am always learning new things, especially from my guests. But this one is one that I've just always shied away from learning about because I'm like, I don't get it and I don't know. And is it really important? Do I need it? But now I feel like I know everything. So if you guys want more information from this episode, you can go to wanderwealthypodcast.com/podcast/episode 95. I will link everything up there. You can go find Naz as well. And if you want to join the Facebook community, go to wanderwealthy.com/FB. Did you know there's a community? We're all chatting about money. A lot of people are asking some really good questions, and a lot of people are also answering others' really good questions. You guys are so wonderful and helpful. It helps me, but it also helps other people understand and get to know some of your unique perspectives, tricks, tips, strategies on what you do with your specifically financial situation, but we also talk about a lot of other stuff there. So head on over to the Facebook community. That's where we're going to be really compiling a lot of information, and some changes are going to be happening in the Wander Wealthy world. The podcast is staying here, so don't worry about that. But for some premium excess content that might be going away elsewhere, you're going to want to get into the community to access some of that stuff. So I'll talk more about that next week. Don't you worry. But until then, let's go out and conquer the world together and be financially savvy females. All right? Until next time, I hope you wander wealthy.